You're not bad at focusing. Your brain is carrying too much, switching too often, and absorbing more input than it can properly process. That's why you can sit down to work, open one tab, then another, then check your phone for no real reason, and suddenly feel tired before you've done anything difficult. It doesn't feel dramatic. It feels normal. That's what makes it dangerous. Most people don't realize their brain is overloaded because overload doesn't always look like a breakdown. Sometimes it looks like scrolling in silence, rereading the same sentence 3 times, forgetting small things, feeling busy all day, and still ending the day with a strange sense that nothing fully registered. A lot of people assume the problem is laziness, lack of discipline, or weak motivation. But that explanation is too shallow. The modern brain is not struggling because it has become less capable. It is struggling because it is being asked to process a volume of stimulation that human attention was never designed to handle continuously. Notifications, feeds, background content, unfinished tasks, low-grade stress, open loops, constant decisions, and social comparison all compete for the same limited mental resources. When that happens long enough, the brain stops operating in a deliberate, focused way and starts shifting into a reactive mode. That reactive mode is important to understand because it changes how you think. Your prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain involved in planning, inhibition, working memory, and sustained attention, functions best when demands are clear and limited. But when too many signals arrive at once, that system becomes strained. The brain then relies more heavily on faster, easier patterns. It starts looking for what is immediately rewarding, immediately urgent, or immediately relieving. In other words, your attention becomes less intentional and more stimulus-driven. You don't choose where your mind goes as much as your environment chooses for you. This is why overload often disguises itself as a focus problem. The symptom is poor concentration, but the mechanism is deeper. Attention is not just something you have. It is something your brain allocates. An allocation depends on energy, perceived relevance, emotional state, and competing stimuli. If your mind is cluttered by too many inputs, even simple tasks begin to feel mentally expensive. That expense creates friction. And once a task feels effortful, the brain starts searching for a cheaper alternative. That cheaper alternative is usually dopamine-rich distraction. Not because dopamine is inherently bad, but because dopamine helps the brain prioritize what seems worth pursuing. When you're mentally overloaded, small digital rewards become especially powerful. A message, a new video, a refresh, a quick search, a brief scroll. These actions provide novelty, and novelty signals possible reward. The brain interprets that as relief from cognitive strain. So distraction is not random. It is often the brain's attempt to regulate discomfort. This is why people can feel exhausted and restless at the same time. The brain is tired, but it has been trained to keep scanning. It has low capacity for deep work, but high sensitivity to incoming stimulation. That combination creates a painful mental state. You want rest, but still reach for more input. You want clarity, but keep adding noise. This is not irrational when viewed through brain function. An overloaded nervous system does not always move toward true recovery. It often moves toward easy stimulation because easy stimulation asks less of you in the moment. There is also a memory cost to this. Working memory, the system that temporarily holds and manipulates information, is extremely limited. It can only carry so much at once. When your day is filled with constant switching between email, messaging, social media, tasks, decisions, and background media, you create cognitive residue. Part of your attention remains stuck on what you just left, so even when you return to the important task in front of you, some of your mental bandwidth is still occupied. This is one reason fragmented days feel so draining. The problem is not just the amount of work, it is the number of mental transitions. Mental fatigue is often misunderstood for this reason. People think fatigue comes only from hard thinking. But the brain also gets tired from unresolved inputs, constant context switching, emotional monitoring, and micro decisions. Choosing what to answer, what to ignore, what to watch, what to save, what to compare, what to worry about. These seem small, but they accumulate. Every open loop places a tiny claim on attention. The brain keeps them active in the background because unfinished things are treated as potentially important. This creates a subtle but constant pressure. That pressure changes behavior in ways people rarely notice. You become more impulsive, not because your values changed, but because self-control becomes harder under cognitive load. The prefrontal cortex needs energy to inhibit impulses. When mental resources are low, inhibition weakens. So you click faster, avoid harder tasks, delay decisions, and seek simpler forms of reward. This is why overstimulation often leads to procrastination. The brain is not saying, I don't care. It is saying, I can't process another demanding thing right now, so give me something easier. This also explains why productivity systems often fail. If someone is already cognitively overloaded, adding a complicated routine can become one more burden. The issue isn't that structure never helps. It does. But productivity only works when it reduces mental friction, not when it creates more. A brain under strain does not need more pressure. It needs less chaos. It needs fewer decisions, fewer switches, and fewer competing signals. Otherwise, even good habits feel hard to maintain because they are being built on top of a flooded mental system. The environment plays a larger role here than most people think. Human attention is highly responsive to cues. Your brain is constantly asking, what matters right now? In a digital environment, everything is designed to answer that question aggressively. Red badges, autoplay, recommendations, alerts, endless scroll, and algorithmic novelty all exploit attentional bias. They present information in a way that feels urgent or potentially rewarding. So even if you think you are just weak at resisting distraction, part of the truth is that your attention is being strategically competed for, and this competition doesn't stop when the screen turns off. The brain adapts to repeated patterns. If you spend enough time in short-form stimulation, your reward system starts expecting frequent shifts. Sustained focus then feels comparatively flat. Not painful exactly, but understimulating. This matters because the brain learns from repetition. If it repeatedly receives dopamine through quick novelty, it becomes more likely to seek novelty again when discomfort appears. Over time, that creates a loop. Hard task, slight discomfort, search for stimulation, temporary relief, reduced attention tolerance, then more difficulty returning to the hard task. This is one of the most damaging effects of overload. It changes not only your behavior, but your interpretation of yourself. After enough fragmented days, people start building an identity around the symptoms. They say, I have no discipline, or I can't focus anymore, or I'm just not productive. But identity often forms around repeated state, not deep truth. If your brain has spent months in overstimulation and mental fatigue, your current behavior reflects an overloaded system, not a permanent character flaw. That distinction matters because shame makes regulation harder. When people feel ashamed of their distraction, they often respond with more internal pressure. They try to force concentration through self-criticism. But threat and guilt do not reliably improve executive function. In many cases, they make it worse. Stress narrows attention, increases emotional reactivity, and pushes the brain toward immediate coping behaviors. So the more aggressively you attack yourself for not focusing, the more likely you are to seek relief through avoidance. The behavioral loop becomes self-reinforcing. You feel bad, so you distract. You distract, so you feel worse. Then you call that laziness. A more accurate frame is this. Your brain protects itself from overload by reducing depth. It chooses what is easiest to process, fastest to reward, and least emotionally costly in the short term. That adaptation may not serve your long-term goals, but it makes sense in the moment. And once you understand that, the solution becomes clearer. You do not solve overload primarily by demanding more from your brain. You solve it by changing what your brain is being exposed to and asked to manage. The first shift is to stop treating all mental input as neutral. Information has a cognitive cost. Every podcast playing in the background, every tab left open, every notification preview, every unresolved message, every random piece of content you consume becomes part of your attentional environment. The brain has to orient to it, filter it, or store it. That means reducing overload begins with subtraction, not optimization. Before trying to improve focus, lower the volume of unnecessary input. The brain cannot recover clarity while being continuously interrupted. This is why silence matters more than people think. Not silence as an aesthetic preference, but as a neurological condition. The brain needs periods where it is not reacting. When there is no constant novelty to track, attention can settle. Working memory clears. Emotional signals become easier to detect. The nervous system gets a break from orienting. Many people avoid this because stillness initially feels uncomfortable. That discomfort is revealing. It often means the brain has become accustomed to external stimulation as a way to avoid internal noise. But if you never allow that noise to surface, it never gets processed. The second shift is to respect task switching as a real cost. Multitasking feels productive because it creates the sensation of movement. But the brain does not truly perform multiple demanding cognitive tasks at once. It alternates. And every alternation has a price. Attention residue, reorientation time, and working memory reload all consume energy. So if you often end the day feeling busy but mentally scattered, the issue may not be lack of effort. It may be too many switches. Protecting focus often means protecting continuity, because continuity allows the brain to go deeper without constantly resetting. The third shift is to understand dopamine correctly. Dopamine is not just pleasure. It is anticipation, motivation, and salience. It helps the brain mark what seems worth pursuing. In an overstimulating environment, high-frequency rewards distort that signal. Ordinary but meaningful activities like reading, studying, writing, or solving a problem may start to feel dull, not because they are inherently dull, but because your reward system has been calibrated to faster spikes. This can be reversed, but only if the brain is given repeated exposure to lower intensity forms of engagement without constant interruption. That is why recovery from overload can feel boring at first. You reduce stimulation, and nothing dramatic happens. In fact, things may feel slower, flatter, even slightly empty. But that emptiness is often the nervous system recalibrating. The brain is learning again how to sustain attention without needing a reward every few seconds. If you misinterpret that phase as failure, you return to old patterns. If you understand it as adaptation, you stay with it long enough for deeper focus to become rewarding again. There is also an identity shift here that matters. Instead of asking, "Why can't I be more disciplined?" ask, "What kind of environment is my brain trying to survive?" That question is less accusatory and more accurate. It moves the problem from moral weakness to cognitive conditions. Once you see that, you stop trying to become a different person overnight and start becoming a better manager of attention. That is a more stable form of productivity because it works with brain function instead of against it. Practically, this means creating moments in your day where your brain has only one job, not because single tasking is trendy, but because focused attention depends on constraint. When the brain knows what to ignore, it performs better. When everything remains available, attention stays partially open. That open state is exhausting. Clear boundaries reduce the load. One screen, one task, one decision at a time may sound simple, but simplicity is often what an overloaded brain is missing. It also means noticing when you are seeking stimulation versus when you are seeking relief. Those are not always the same. Many distractions are self-soothing behaviors disguised as entertainment. You're not always looking for fun. Sometimes you're trying to escape friction, uncertainty, boredom, or mental strain. If you can identify the discomfort underneath the urge, you gain leverage. The moment becomes less automatic. You start seeing the behavioral loop before it completes itself. And finally, it means accepting that rest is not the same as consumption. A lot of people are never truly resting. They are filling empty space with content, filling fatigue with novelty, filling stress with stimulation. But the brain does not experience all passive activity as recovery. Real recovery lowers demand. It does not keep asking for orientation, judgment, comparison, and response. Sometimes the most productive thing for your focus is not another system, but a period of reduced input, long enough for your attention to return to baseline. If your brain feels foggy, distracted, and harder to control than it used to, that does not automatically mean something is wrong with you. It may simply mean your attention has been carrying more than it can integrate. And when the brain is overloaded, it does what overloaded systems do. It becomes reactive, inefficient, and drawn to the path of least resistance. Seeing that clearly is not pessimistic. It is useful. Because once you stop calling overload a personality flaw, you can finally respond to it with precision. The real goal is not becoming perfectly focused all the time. That is unrealistic. The goal is to build a mental environment where focus is possible again, where dopamine is not constantly hijacking attention, where productivity comes from clarity instead of pressure, and where your brain is not spending every day defending itself against overstimulation. When that happens, concentration stops feeling like force. It starts feeling like what it actually is, a natural function of a mind that finally has enough space to think. The strange part is that many people are living in overload for so long that calm feels unfamiliar. But unfamiliar does not mean wrong. Sometimes the first sign of healing is not intensity. It is quiet, fewer urges, less internal static, more depth, more room between impulse and action. And in that room, something important returns. Not just focus, but choice. That may be what overload takes from people most of all. Not intelligence, not ambition, just the ability to direct their own attention. And once that begins to come back, a lot of things start to make sense. You were never meant to process everything. Your brain was built to filter, prioritize, and go deep on what matters. If it has become scattered, that does not mean it is broken. It may simply mean it has been asked to live in conditions that reward fragmentation. The answer is not more self-judgment. It is better conditions, better boundaries, and a more accurate understanding of what your mind has been dealing with. Sometimes the most intelligent shift is not pushing harder. It is reducing what your brain has to fight through so it can finally do what it was designed to do.